Hi there, my name is Sean Peacock and I'm presenting this on behalf of my co-authors Rob and Clara. And in this paper we present a socio-technical process designed to engage children in an urban design project in Newcastle, North East England. So only recently has HCI begun exploring the design of digital processes to support children participating in urban design. But more often than not, children are practically voiceless in decisions about streets, places and neighbourhoods that they inhabit. But children are just as affected by the place around them as adults, and their exclusion means that we are shaping places based on what we assume children want and not giving them any opportunity to play a part in city making. So recognising this, we sought to produce a research intervention by plugging into a live urban design project in Newcastle called Streets for People. This project started in 2014 and is still ongoing. The purpose of this project was essentially to identify and deliver small street improvements to 3 neighbourhoods of the city. So, for example, closing this street that you see here to traffic to make it more friendly for walkers and cyclists. The project was led by the City Council, who were the local government body. The other key stakeholders were residents, business owners and urban design consultants brought in by the City Council. So in 2014, the City Council consulted residents to find out what the problems were in the 3 different neighbourhoods. And after this consultation, the City Council helped form small groups of local residents. These resident groups were tasked with coming up with urban design solutions to the problems that had been identified. And once they'd finalised these solutions, they were going to be put back out to citywide consultation. So we got involved as the resident groups were in the process of discussing problems and possible solutions. And we'd noticed that no children whatsoever had taken part in the consultation at all, and no children were in the resident groups either. So we sought to redress this by opening a space for children to make meaningful contributions through our involvement. We proposed to deliver a research intervention that would involve children in Streets for People by working in 2 elementary schools in 2 different neighbourhoods. In each of these schools, we would deliver an engagement process consisting of 3 sessions. We'd first enable children to identify urban design problems and ideas by taking part in a neighbourhood walk. We would then allow them to map and discuss each other's ideas using an online platform we developed called Makeplace. And finally, we would give them the opportunity to present their findings to residents and the City Council through a town hall meeting. So our first session, the neighbourhood walk. To meaningfully involve children in the project, we undertook a process of translation, so translating the rationale and ideas emerging from the resident groups into something more meaningful for children. And if we were to avoid being tokenistic, we would also have to allow the children to come up with problems and ideas for themselves. So we collaborated with the City Council, the resident groups and with school teachers to design the walk. And our hope was that we could open spaces for children to take part, as well as, importantly, for their insights and the outcomes of the project to feed directly back into the project. And you can see here some of our initial design work, our design thinking for the walk. So the first part of our engagement involved designing 2 different walking routes, 1 for each school. We created these routes so that they would allow the children to explore the different streets that would be affected by the project and come up with ideas for change. This walk took in 4 stops on 4 different streets, which is what's depicted here. And each stop entailed a scenario, along with a set of activities contained on prompt cards. These activities explored current problems in the street and future changes that could be made to the street, so there's quite a clear distinction between the 2. The activities we designed followed a repetitive format for each stop. So firstly, think about the scenario. For example, people are annoyed about cars driving and parking on their street. Identify current problems in the street. So why might people living here be annoyed about cars driving and parking on the street? And then finally, gather ideas for future changes. So how would you make the street better if cars weren't allowed to use it? So we worked with 9 and 10-year-old children in this, in the elementary schools, and the children worked in groups and chose individual roles and a different tool to record their responses to the activities. These tools were digital, for example, using tablets to take photographs of the street, but they were also non-digital too, so for example, using pen and paper to write on worksheets or using sidewalk chalk. In designing the scenarios and the activities, we drew on key issues and ideas being discussed by the residents groups, so for example, road safety, cycling, greenery and play. And in doing this, we wanted to ground the children's thinking within the context of the street, but most importantly, enhance the process and make a valuable contribution to it by exploring different problems and opportunities beyond what the reference groups were already discussing. Once back in the classroom, we encouraged the groups of children to reflect on their responses and elaborate on their favourite idea by making a poster and a short video pitch. So the second part of our engagement involved the children using an online platform we designed called MakePlace. MakePlace is a map-based engagement tool for citizens to map problems and ideas for change in the neighbourhood. We created it to enable the children to share the things they found on the walk and discuss their findings in class. And this is what MakePlace looks like. So within MakePlace, we asked them to describe the problem or the idea that they found and then upload some media that would illustrate their response. So this would then generate a pin on a map, so you can see individual and clustered pins on the screenshot above. And then these pins were available for everyone in the class to browse and comment upon. We ran this session in two parts. So firstly, the children worked in their groups to place as many pins as they could in the time they had available. And then once they'd done this, the children would browse each other's pins and provide feedback in the form of comments and of emojis, which you can see here. Between the two schools, they generated hundreds of pins and comments that reflected the multiple problems that they found in the neighbourhood and the ideas they had to solve these problems. So the final part of our engagement process was the town hall meeting. In this meeting, the children presented their posters and their videos to local residents and the City Council. And then they also shared the pins that they'd made on MakePlace too, as you can kind of see on the screen here. This provided the children with the opportunity to engage in dialogue with local stakeholders and actually hold them to account about their involvement. So it was a key part of the process for us. And from all of this work, we identify three key findings from the running of this engagement process. I mean, we go into a lot more detail about this in the paper, but I'll provide a brief overview of these now. So we felt that by being physically situated in the places they were helping to redesign, they were able to generate ideas that were grounded in place, so feasible in their scope, appropriately scaled, respectful of physical constraints too, such as simplifying a road junction, putting in traffic lights, stop signs and street lights. And importantly, the children actually drew on how similar problems had been addressed elsewhere, but this didn't stop them from being creative either. So, for example, installing a living wall to improve air quality, or painting the shops different colours to drive up local trade. They also went beyond their own embodied experiences to demonstrate empathy for other people too, for example, drivers, cyclists, and people with strollers. So we also found that their ideas were heavily influenced by their own normative perceptions on how a place should be. So, for example, one group felt really strongly that residents should take better care of their neighbourhood, and another wanted to remove enforced restrictions on play, so maybe quite common to see no ball games, for example. So they were saying they want to let children play with anything they want because we don't want to spoil their childhood. And this was a 10-year-old child basically making this observation. And this really revealed to us a depth of engagement that actually quite surprised us too. This advocacy also took the form of children using MakePlace to keep each other in check and regulate each other's ideas. So, for example, one group argued that the school playground should have more space, fair enough. But this was knocked back by another group who thought they should be grateful for the size of the playground because it's absolutely huge. And I think in this way, the children were using MakePlace not only to show support or otherwise for each other's ideas, but they were actually engaging in a collective endeavour of prioritising and strengthening each other's ideas so that they could propose them to the City Council. However, our findings also compelled us to question the limits of children's agency in political processes. So, for example, during one of the town hall meetings, one of the residents suggested that they may be able to leverage almost the symbolic capital of the school children to get others on board with their ideas. And this is really captured in the quote here. They may feel more obliged if the kids approach them. Really kind of sums it up for us. And whilst this demonstrated to us the power of getting children involved in processes like this and the power that they could have, it actually also revealed to us the extent to which children are at risk of having their voices appropriated by powerful people within the community. And at this same meeting, actually, when the children asked the City Council what would happen to their ideas, the officer present suggested that their ideas were just likely to kind of strengthen the ideas they'd already come up with, which may be familiar to a lot of you, kind of familiar with planning processes. It's kind of how it's usually done, but instead of them, for example, contributing to the list of interventions that they were going to do, it was really just strengthening what was already there. So obviously we don't apply any necessary malice in this, but actually just made us think about the limits and the motivations of this kind of community engagement. And it really left us with a burning question of to what extent can children's voices actually meaningfully influence urban design projects like this? Nevertheless, though, we think that these findings do challenge our perceptions of what children are able to do when processes are more sensitively designed for their involvement. And obviously, as society positions children as vulnerable, we really sought to kind of reconfigure their position as competent social actors and get them to participate on a level with adults. By engaging the children in a process that was tackling real-world problems, we demonstrated that there's room for children to participate meaningfully if they're given the appropriate tools to do so. And we genuinely think without our work, children would have likely been completely unaware of the projects happening in their neighbourhood. But in HCI supporting children as capable social actors, we must be aware and actually account for the ways in which our translation will have significantly mediated their experience. Our findings also demonstrate that there can be value in children and adults working together in digitally mediated spaces to help in city making. And this kind of work really presents a real opportunity to open spaces of intergenerational dialogue between children and adults. However, children and adults participating jointly in these spaces will inevitably raise significant ethical issues. So, for example, the risks that children face in online spaces of cyberbullying, privacy, infringement, abuse or exploitation even. And this really presents concrete challenges for HCI. So we would call on the HCI community to help develop responses to these emerging conundrums through design and explore what it would mean to enable children's participation in digital platforms on a level playing field with adults, whilst also being mindful of the need to take care and not put children at risk. And I suppose finally we propose two ways in which HCI could further intervene in this space. So firstly, working with schools on civic projects could create opportunities to include children in city-making processes. Here, HCI might assist in the design of toolkits that allow for the scaling up and replicating of processes such as ours. And then secondly, HCI could assist in the design of intergenerational platforms too to support city-making. These could enable both children and adults to help shape the city together and scaffold civic processes that are more accessible, legible and inclusive for all people. But we really wish for our work to serve as a call for further research to explore how we can design processes that invite collaborations between children and city stakeholders, whilst also accounting for the tensions presented by opening up these kind of participatory spaces. That's all I want to say. Thank you very much for listening. I'll be very happy to take any questions.
Hello, Annika Wern from Uppsala University. Thank you for a very, very interesting talk. When we did something similar some years ago, there was one thing that came up that I wonder how you dealt with, and that's that the children who are participants in these processes not to be children anymore when the systems, the place is actually being redesigned. So how do you deal with the fact that they build their hopes up for a change that one might not happen while they live there, or at least while they are still children?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Thank you for that. And actually, I think that's potentially a question to ask kind of the whole nature of urban design and planning, actually, because, I mean, for example, in Newcastle, the communities that we worked in, one of them in particular has quite a large transient population of students. So there's a lot of people in that community who, as you say, if they're not going to be living there in a couple of years, or they're kind of going to move on, or, you know, the fact that they don't necessarily resonate with that area anymore, then they don't necessarily feel that they should have a stake in that area. And I think it is a real challenge, actually, for involving children in placemaking. I mean, what we try to do in our process is, for example, we've worked with, and I don't actually know what the grade numbers are in America, but it's year 5, so it was 9 and 10-year-olds, and they were going to be staying in the elementary schools we worked in for another year. So I think the intention was that hopefully, if the urban design interventions were to come forward, and with these kind of projects, there's quite a tight timescale with funding as well, the idea was that they could be at least in the neighbourhood for another year and a bit to kind of see how their work has developed.
So in one of the projects, the solution was to work with a local fixing organization. So their job was to fix the small things immediately. Yeah. So they were also involved and got the same results. Yeah. So in that sense, there could be some immediate feedback.
Absolutely, and you know, this is why some of the things they said, for example, what they're saying, you know, if they were talking about greenery, a lot of them talked about putting in planters or improving people's gardens. Those are really quick fixes. You could put a planter there the next day and see it. And there was a lot of kind of talk of this as well. So yeah, I think that's a great point. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Abraham from University of Michigan. I was wondering, to what extent do you think the children should be regarded as like one stakeholder group, and how much of them should be with individuals? Because I feel like, especially if there are adults in the meeting, there is like, each adult might be more considered individual, whereas the children, if they're presenting together, they're viewed as one collective children.
Yes.
So I was wondering if you saw that, or what you thought like appropriate responses should be, if children should be regarded, or what are your thoughts on that one? Yeah,
it's a difficult one, but it's an excellent point, actually, because that is, from my experience working in this space, that's actually what I've seen. That, for example, children, you know, if they have kind of a youth parliament or a youth kind of advocacy organisation, they are kind of seen as, this is what the children think, and it kind of groups them all. And in terms of kind of, you know, there's benefits, I suppose, to that in a way, because if children kind of are acting collectively, that is quite exciting, actually, you know, children, you know, having a united voice and not exactly being disparate. But I'd say that for adults as well, you know, if there's advocacy groups within civil society that, you know, would advocate, I think more voices are usually stronger than individual voices. But I think this really does kind of, you know, draw out the need for designing kind of sensitive processes that kind of allow individual responses to kind of come out. But obviously there's ethical issues with that too, because, you know, we couldn't name any of the children who took part, even though they probably wanted to be named. So we kind of have to overcome quite a few challenges, but I think it's a great point.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We can do only one more question.
Yeah, cool, thanks.
Hi, Sean.
Hi.
I'm Kelly. I'm from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And first of all, this was an amazing talk. Thank you for sharing this.
Thank you so
but
much.
I was curious how you came up with the age group, I think you said of 4th graders, especially when we're trying to balance, like, you know, having the youthful voice, but also not being too young so they're not taken seriously. You know, perhaps like feedback would have been taken more seriously if they were older, for instance. So I was just curious how you chose the 4th graders.
Yeah, so we chose the kind of age group because basically the urban design interventions that the resident groups were talking about had a lot of impact on the schools. I mean, for example, in one of the neighbourhoods, they were going to be making changes directly outside of this elementary school. And obviously we'd given a lot of thought to the kind of age groups that we work with. There is some challenges in working in schools, as some of you might be kind of familiar with high schools being a lot more challenging to work within, because especially in the UK at least, they have very strict curricula, and it's very, very hard to kind of take children out of class to do this kind of work. So there was something kind of in that as well, but actually I think 9 and 10-year-old children, from what we saw at least, were of the age that they were really starting to question things in their environment and question kind of things that they held true, whilst also being quite optimistic as well about the future, which was quite nice too. So it was kind of a couple of things, but yeah, obviously this work could be done with older children too.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.